again, Dan. After a short break there, you had some last questions for me, didn't you?
Yep. I'm not sure if this ever came up during our campaigns of Heroes of Aeowe or not, but could you explain to our listener who High King Arcanine is?
I would be happy to. So, mentioned earlier in today's episode, we have that it's been about 400 years since that Warforged invasion, which I mentioned. And between the Warforged invasion and when people showed up on the world, the beginning of the story was when people showed up, which is 600 years before the Warforged invasion. So 1,000 years before the start of our story. And so because of that, King Arcanine was the son of the very first king of Aeowe. And that man, his name is lost to history. But as far as the peoples remember, Arcanine is actually an elf, or like a long-lived person. We're not really sure exactly what he is, and the reason why most people don't know is because he travels around in the guise of a pauper to review the world and make sure that he is helping the world and not harming it as a ruler. So that's why people don't know who he is really in terms of they know what he did though. He had another brother, and his brother and him grew up together on another world within the Kawawe system. Remember, Aeowe is inside of a solar system called Kawawe. And another world in that system had it where they had a kingdom. Their father had a kingdom. But then there was an argument between Arcanine and his brother Melkinin. His brother's name was Melkinin. He was the younger brother. Arcanine was the older brother. And their father said, guys, stop doing that. But then they split their kingdoms. And one brother went one way because he wanted to use science and technology, and he created what later became the Aeowe. And that was his continuing invading force, the Warforged invasion, in order to take out King Arcanine. King Arcanine, though, was a very wise man, very scholarly, but also amazing with a sword on the battlefield. And he was also an amazing father. He had 7 kids. Well, 6 of them survived. And those 7 kids and his wife and him went to battle against his brother's forces, who were trying to take his kingdom away from him, the kingdom of Aeowe, which later became literally the name of the entire world. Because there were not many humans or fantasy races living on the world at the time. And so he went to battle with his 7 children, and those 7 children fought. And one of them, the youngest child, the Zayn, or the 7th, as we know her according to the directives of the Warforged invasion, didn't make it due to, well, a Warforged strike. King Arcanine his kids are adults, so, well, you know what happens. Sometimes kids move out of their parents' homes and live their own lives. And so that's exactly what the 7 did. Well, 6 after the 7th one died. But Arcanine, it was not because they fought with their parents. It was because they needed to move and expand and spread out. But Arcanine is a very loving man, and according to Koi, if you ever asked him, Koi would tell you that he is a man who pursues foes with the utmost desire to be creating beauty but lasting love within the world. Other than that, he is a traveling king, a wanderer, so much about him is not known, about him directly as a person. What he looks like, what he sounds like. People know him more for what he does as his actions than what he himself might say, if that makes sense.
So, do people ever speculate how old he might be and whether or not he's still alive or not?
Well, if we do the timeline thing, he was there when the humans first showed up on Kawawe. So Aeowe, specifically the world, showed up in the Kawawe system. So he was the one who founded the kingdom of Aeowe on the world of Aeowe. So what that means is therefore he might be over 1,000 years old. Elves do live a long time, and most people suspect he's an elf.
And I believe that you haven't mentioned it to our listeners, but one of his names is Seer, right?
Yes, he had a mysterious ability. His power, given by Phos to rule his kingdom, was he was very wise, first of all, but secondly, his ability to put patterns together and see things that might or might not be coming. He never said he confirmed knew for sure, but he had a very strong suspicion things would happen because of his like tactile focused mind. He could put pieces that were seemingly unrelated together to become related, and because of that, he was known as Seer. But he also had a burn from his brother when they were those battles that killed his daughter. The one thing that everyone did know, and how you would know it was King Arcanen that you were talking to, is he has a burn across his bridge of his nose. It's a sear mark, like a burn, like as if somebody took a metal rod and placed it up against his face. It's from a sword. That's a story for another time. You might learn about that in the episodes. Or we might do another lore episode like this, but for now, you need to know the way you recognize him is he's got a burn across his bridge of his nose, and that's why he's also known as Seer.
Okay, I guess the next two questions are kind of related to one another, but you mentioned that High King Arcanen has 7 children.
hmm
So who exactly are they and why are they important in our history of the world?
He had 7 kids, and these are their names. And these are their roles within his kingdom. They all have titles, so these are not their last names. In fact, the King Arcanen, the kids don't have last names, because this is the point in history where last names didn't mean as much, but a title did. So in this case, his first child was named Luke of Lutra. Luke is not how you spell it, it's Lhuke. Luke of Lutra. And he was the marshal of his father's forces, meaning he was like the supreme commander of those who fought. And he had a unique ability to discern, specifically like to command people to follow him, and as well to be excellent in battle. So that was like he was an amazing swordsman, and he was also an amazing commander. He was known as leader of a clan, so they were divided up into clans. His kids divided themselves into what, as I said, are called clans. They got the idea from befriending the dragons, and a group of dragons in this world is called a clan. And so his clan is the Marshals. His next kid was a daughter, and she was very intelligent and a scholar, and she's known as Vespered Ord Palion. And she is responsible for like creating these works of science and inventions. She is basically the patron person. If you wanted to build something for the war effort against the enemies of the Jurashan peoples, which are the people of the kingdom of Aeowe, you would go to her and say, "Hey, I would like to work with you to build things," because she was very intelligent. She was like the lady who would put the pieces together, like her father. She inherited that background of his. And next up, they had another daughter. Her name was Riza Kaladin, founder of the kingdom of Arstrelon, which is a sub-kingdom under her father's. She was very scholarly, but in the way of like history and people. She was very, very in tune with the people. She worked a lot with those who were a lot less fortunate than those like of royal blood. Then they had another kid. The fourth was a son. His name was Onaluxai, son of Arcanen, is his full. And he was the leader of the people who kept the Book of the Way. He was the one who was like a spiritual leader or an advisor, and he basically became that to his father. He was very in connection with Fos and walked with him daily, but led others in the ways of like what Fos had made them to do, if that makes sense. It's like he would be like the equivalent of modern day, like a for those who are more of a Catholic heritage, he'd be like the father or the brother of a monastery, or a father of like of the church, or in more of an evangelical Lutheran or other things, he'd be like the pastor or the um, leader of like a church. That would be his bishop or whatever title the leader of a church would be. In this world, they're called scions. And then next, they had a son named Malin, Maallin, and he was very adept as a fighter. So he worked very closely with his brother Luke, and he was very, very skilled at crafting and making weapons. War was like his whole personality, but he also had a soft side and loved to cultivate like strength within people to like make sure that they felt like they were strong, both emotionally but also physically. And then the sixth one was Koi Gustavo. We've met him in the podcast. He's a scholar. Not much is known about him except for he basically followed his other siblings around, being one of the youngest siblings. That's what happens in a family a lot of the time. You want to be like your other siblings, but he couldn't pick who he was in terms of like, did he have a definitive thing he wanted to pursue in life? Not really, other than research and learning. And, well, he's also a good fighter and magic user. So he became known as a binder, somebody who bound people together. That was his skill, to connect things, to talk to people, to learn, to study, but also to fight for them if they needed fighting for. And that was him. And last but not least, not much is known about her because she was extremely young when she died, in terms of like she was a young adult. So she had not become like in the spotlight like her other siblings. This is Lyridae Songwind. She loved to spend time in nature though, and she was known as the Rim Walker, the one who protected her other siblings as they went about their days, because she would sit and stare or hide in the background like a ranger, and she would learn about the world in a silent respect. She barely talked. Most people say she almost maybe didn't talk, but used sign language, so that they're not really sure who she was directly. But Koi and her seemed to have a very, very close relationship. And she was the baby of the family, so everyone was like, come hang out with us, and she'd just flip between her siblings. As far as people know, no one knows much about them. About her specific.
You call them Jurashon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us about how you came up with the name?
Yeah. Jerushaon. I made up a language when I was in high school. Jerushaon means the awakened in the language that I made up. And what it means is Je means like to open your eye. It's the sound of like Ja, first breath of the day or the first understanding of being alive. Ru is the idea of like becoming active, to be active in the day. And Sha'on is the sound like of standing and moving forwards, to push forwards. And so put together, Jarusha'on is the pronunciation is directly how you'd say it in the language, but simplified to common, or in this case English, it's Jurashon. And so they are the peoples of the kingdom of Aeowe, which later gave its name to the world of Aeowe.
Do they possess any special powers, or is that spoilers?
Good question. And the answer is if you are descended from one of the 7 children, except for, well, the 7th, she disappeared, so we don't know if she had kids. Um, but if somebody's descended from them, chances are they probably do. You just don't know the full definition because, well, people live a long time and it probably takes a long time to develop the powers that they have. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. What are some famous locations within Aeowe? And what's their geography like?
Yeah, so the world of Aeowe is very diverse, as in it's got 4 major oceans. It's got a large number of different species, sea creatures, and other creatures living within the world. And for primary navigation points, there are 2 continents to begin with. There are Nakur and Napaja. Some prominent locations on Nakur are the Tokian ice fields, the Lear ice fields, the Ilandra forest, which also, according to legend, holds the Fey realm, the Hovios Desert, the Morganthan Mountains, the plains of Anosade, Lake Horgroff, the Esben Depths, Beridis Mountains, and last but not least, mysterious place called the Eldrin Depths. And there are a lot of the continent of Nakur is plains, mountains, and desert. It's got some ice fields due to the fact that the planet actually orbits reverse of Earth, so the planet orbits so that the south is colder than the north. But on both ends, of course, there are ice caps, polar ice caps. The Porton ice fields in the north, and in the south, the Lux ice fields. In terms of the continent of Napaja, some prominent locations are the Siri Gulch, which was the site of the largest battle known to history, which was when the Warforged invasion happened. It was the final battle, which killed the 7th child of King Arcanine, as we've talked about King Arcanine before. And then it's, again, a very deep, so it's at its largest point, it's like 11 miles down, like the Marine Trench, in Australia's waters and around the surrounding area. And so it's like 11 miles down. And at its shallowest point, like 5 miles. It's a pretty deep cavern. Or I guess you could say canyon in the ground. Then there also, as well, are the Vendel Plains, where the ancient civilizations of the Plains peoples and the Lantern Waste peoples have lived. There's a small, in terms of the scale of the world, but large in terms of like traveling around it. It's called the Breaking Sea. It's in freshwater inland sea. 4 major oceans surrounding the 2 continents are the Xeric Ocean, the Crashing Ocean, the Element Ocean, and the Tetra Ocean. Other notable locations within the oceans are the islands of Arstralon, where Riza founded her small kingdom. Nihon is another island within the Crashing Ocean. Both Arstralon and Nihon are in the Crashing Ocean. In the Tetra Ocean, there is not much going on, but along the borders of where 3 oceans meet, specifically the Tetra Ocean, Element Ocean, and the Zurich Ocean, you have the island of Nervand, which has a famous city called Yin, which is not featured yet very prominently in any tales, but it will be in later stories. There's also, within the Element Ocean, the islands of Ekthros, which has Prism City, which is a city made entirely out of colored glass, Rest City on the Dawn Island, and as well the island of Illing Lotus, which is home to the current seat of power of King Arcanine, Maru, and Old Maru, both districts of ancient cities destroyed at one point or another by battles, and also a large, scary mountain called Suffering Mountain. And that borders the north part of the island of Illing Lotus, borders on the Element and the Zurich Oceans. And then, way up to the north is Bothocenth, Bergen, or the Bergen Archipelagos, where there are various small islands, the major ones being the island of Bergen, Lothian, and the capital city of that area is known as Bergen City. But in terms of geography, Napaja is the larger continent, Nakur is the smaller one, Illing Lotus is smack dab right in between the two of them, in the middle of the oceans. Nervan, the island, is to the south, and to the north is the islands archipelagos of the Bergen Isles. Any questions from you on to geography?
Yeah, so is there or are there real world equivalent of cultures on any specific islands or continents?
I would say there's not like a direct link equivalent, but heavy inspiration. As an example, Illing Lotus was very inspired by a lot of Asian culture, specifically related to Japanese, kind of the Southeast Asian um, cultures. I know for you, you is it correct in me understanding one of your heritage parts is from one of the countries in South Asia?
Yeah, I'm from Vietnam.
That's really cool. So there's probably a little bit of flavor of style from your culture. I can't directly like connect anything specific, but when I was creating the idea, I pulled a lot of inspiration from um, a little bit from yours, a little bit from some of your neighboring countries, and as well Japan and China a little bit too. So yeah, there's a lot of different things, and I'm sure that Yi saying your character with her heritage as well. She's, you said, from the Bergen Archipelago. Is that correct?
Yeah, and she's basically a real world equivalent of a Korean.
Ah, that's an intriguing thought. Um, for the Bergen Isles are very diverse, so I'm sure that if she's from there, that she's got a lot of different heritages in her background as well for the cultures, for like the Koanese cultures or Kawaii cultures of the universe.
Yeah, her name's actually meant a lot of things in Korean.
Mm,
So the most prominent two is ideal,
mm-hmm.
and the other one is strange or odd.
Mm. Those are intriguing concepts. I'm sure we'll explore more with her backstory of why that is the case.
Right.
Um, go ahead.
And I guess I already asked about this, but could you basically give us again the summary of the timeline of Aeowe? And what are the important events again? You've mentioned this in the past, but what
Sure.
are the most important events that you might think that it's affecting the story of Heroes of Aeowe as large?
One would be the first arrival of King Arkanen's people around 600 years before the invasion, which shapes our story in current times. 400 years um, before was the invasion, so a total of 1,000 years before. So to summarize, 600 years before the invasion was the arrival of King Arkanen. 600 years after, during the year 1200 on this particular timeline, was the Warforged invasion, aka the invasion of Malkanen, attempted invasion at least, to take over the kingdom his brother had built, the kingdom of Aeowe. After that, there were an event known as the death of the four dragons. The four dragon guardians were the guardians of the oceans. The oceans are named after the dragons. They were massive creatures, but were taken out by a group of adventurers when an very, very, very wrong magic experiment happened which corrupted them. And that kind of led to the decline of the old magic. After that, there was something known as the Twilight Wardens created. They were basically created by those adventurers who were veterans of having to kill those 4 dragons, the basically almost calamitous apocalyptic vision that the dragons left behind in their wake. They created an organization to stop that from happening again, and they were known as the specifically the Grave Rangers, those who watched at the Rim, the Watchers, Watchers, and they were founded by none other than the Seventh before she succumbed to the Warforged assassination or duel that happened between her and Talon's unit, according to Koi Gustava. And that was the Twilight Wardens are a subset of that. We'll get into what those exactly are. They're prominent because they were founded as basically like guardians, undercover guardians to watch the rest of the world so that the world didn't go up in flames again. And then that happened about 100 to 150 years before you guys come onto the scene. But you guys are currently now on the scene, 1,000 years after the arrival of Arcanid's people, in 1600 on the timeline. Not 1600 in Earth timing, but like in this world's timing. So 1,600 years have gone by since the beginning of the first like people setting foot on the world. If that makes sense to you.
To humans, that seems like a really long time, but to elves, it doesn't really seem that long.
That is correct. Most elves and those from the Fey realm live up to 1,000 years. But humans and those of other fantasy races who are not of Fey realm or elvish origin, or the Marian Fey origin, will live about 100 years. Some longer, but most about 100.
All right. So then, is there? You mentioned that there are a lot of people who came into Aeowe from other worlds. So is there a reason why they came to Aeowe?
That is a good question. Actually, the thing is, happenstance plays a lot of factors. They didn't purposely end up, but as I said, one of the, I guess you could say, warped or broken parts about the world itself before it became a habitation for others is that it pulls things from other worlds into its like gravity well of space-time. So they get all jumbled and tangled up. So you'll see anything from like on one side of the map you might see horse and buggies, and on the other it's just people still learning how to tame horses, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. So my last question for the evening is, why are we called heroes of Aeowe, and why are we needed?
Well, according to the podcast so far, you've just been hired as characters um, who are investigating a mysterious archaeological dig under the Ark Society's banner, which is a society ran by Koi Kostava. But, as you've started to figure out, Koi is basically dealing with the aftermath of a battle that happened almost 400 years before. He's a long-lived person. He's got elvish ears, as I've described. But one of the things you see is that he's got a very intense desire to find something or to be protected from something. The question is, what is that? Is it the Oroset, aka the Warforged, or is it something else? That's something that's kind of big spoiler territory. But as far as you know, it's because you've literally saved the prince's life on a few occasions. So in this case, I think, well, he'd probably start calling you the heroes of his kingdom. The heroes of Aeowe, you've kept him alive. You were serving one of the royal family's members, so I'd say that he probably thinks that title's well deserved of you guys, but that also can get into big spoiler territory.
Well, all right. That is all the question I have for tonight. Thank you, Aneli, for answering them.
Oh, you're welcome. Always happy to sit down and talk about the world that people are adventuring into, because then they'll have a better idea of what's going on. Yeah. Thanks, Dan, for interviewing and having some active questions so the listeners might have some questions that I have. And then, as well, if you listeners have any questions, I'm sure that we're going to have some socials at some point here, and you can start asking those. We look forward to hearing from you. But yeah, tuning off for the evening. And this is Aneli, DM of the and creator of the story for Heroes of Aeowe. And it's
I'm Daniel. I'm playing Yi Sang, or more specifically known as Jeong Yi Sang, and I'm her interviewer tonight.
indeed. Well, thanks again, and hope you have a good evening. And good evening to all your listeners as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Heroes of Aeowe. Our dungeon master is Aneli the Fanif. Jeong Yi Sang is played by myself, Daniel. Music provided by Tim Galvin.